Hi everyone, I'm presenting on my report of analyzing arm strength's impact on minor league position player promotion. Now I'd like to start by setting the scene with a moment in baseball history. It's bottom of the ninth inning of Game 7 of the 1992 NLCS. Francisco Cabrera of the home team Atlanta Braves stands at the plate opposite Pittsburgh Pirates closer Stan Belinda, and I can already see some of you grabbing your heads. Like I was saying, the score is 2-1 in favor of the Pirates with 2 outs, and the bases are loaded. Cabrera is able to make contact and sends the ball shallow in the left field that is fielded by Barry Bonds as David Justice scores the tying run. Bonds makes the throw as the third base coach waves the slow-running Sid Bream home. The throw rides offline and bounces towards the first baseline, causing Mike Lavalley to have to adjust. Bream slides in the home plate as Lavalley receives the ball and dives, trying to make a tag to keep the Pirates season alive. But Bream is safe, and the Braves advance to the 1992 World Series. Again, sorry Pirates fans. If Bonds' throw was a little more accurate or had a little more speed, maybe we're saying the Pirates are the 92 World Series champions. This is all to say that overlooked skills can make a significant difference on a team's path to winning a championship. And I'm going to be talking about one of those skills that could have altered the outcome of this game, arm strength. Now, arm strength is one of the 5 tools that makes a position player a useful contributor to their team. But how is arm strength valued? My analysis looks at how does arm strength influence minor league player promotion in a real organization system. Now, I'd like to break down the data quickly. Each of the 3 data sets was provided by SMT, and they include ball events, such as like when the throw occurred, game info, like which players were on the field, and ball position throughout each throw. Overall, there was 97 games spanning 4 seasons in the home parks of 4 different teams. And in the organization, there was 3 teams with 61 games spanning 3 seasons. The teams were labeled from A1, A2 to A3, with Team A1 corresponding to a low level and Team A3 corresponding to a high level. Now, I would like to note in the first season data was collected in the organization, we only have data available at the high level, which is going to limit what we can determine in terms of promotions and demotions. So I'd like to break down about how I calculated throwing speed quickly. And this is a shortened version of my methodology, but it gets the point across. First, I found all ball positions measured during each throw. I then estimated the velocity at the time of the throw for each throw, ignoring air resistance. I then simulated trajectory using air resistance, while applying air resistance. And this was because drag force changes throughout it's proportional to velocity in the opposite direction. So it changes throughout the course of the throw, and that's why I did the simulation approach. And finally, I repeated the simulation with new velocity values until I minimized the difference between the simulated and real trajectory to find an optimized velocity estimate. And this was done for 3,224 throws made by 450 position players, and the distribution of the throws is plotted on the right. We can see that these throws range from 28 to roughly 103 miles per hour, and the distribution is peaking at the high 70 mile per hour to low 80 mile per hour range. Now, I'd like to take a quick look at which positions throw more, and what I want you to get from this figure is the low number of throws made by first basemen. The impact of this is going to be very apparent in my next slide, and we're going to see many first basemen who only made 1 or 2 throws, and it's going to really hurt the accuracy measure of the arm strength I'm going to show you. So when we look at which positions throw harder, for arm strength, I looked at the maximum throwing speed at each position each player played. So players here are appearing multiple times. And like I was saying about first baseman, we can see a notably wide box plot, and especially the 25th to 75th percentile range, because of all these players here who are sub 40 mile per hour throwing arms. Now, this isn't to say they actually have that low of a throwing speed. They probably wouldn't be at this level of baseball if they did. This is more just an outcome of the sample we have of them, and they're only having 1 or 2 times where they didn't actually have to throw as hard as possible. If we look at other positions, this fits with conventional baseball wisdom. We're seeing outfielders throwing harder than infielders, and again, first baseman throwing weakest of all. And when I look at the organization, I attempted to adjust for some of this variance we're seeing from players with small sample sizes. So when we're only looking at players in the organization, the 76 players who are in the organization, I was able to generate box plots here that are much more realistic by removing players' secondary positions where they only made 1 or 2 throws. As you can see, first baseman is much more realistic a range, being like 68 miles per hour to 73 miles per hour in the 75th percentile range. And you're going to be seeing this box plot a lot. And I'm using this box plot to show players' ability relative to their whole organization to see if they're being rewarded or not for their arm strength skill. So let's just get into the first season of data. So like I was saying earlier, this season we only have data for the high level. And we can't make a determination of who was promoted or demoted during the season because of it, but we can determine who was promoted or demoted following the season. So this is the same figure as the previous one, but players who were at the high level at the start of season 2 are in orange, and the players who left the data set are in gray. Now, of these 15 players in gray, that means they left the level and we don't know what happened to them. They could have been promoted to a level higher than what's in the data set. They could have been promoted to the major leagues. They could have been released, traded. It's really impossible to conclude what happened to them with the data we have available. But if we look at the 3 players who went unpromoted, we can see that 2 had a weak arm strength at their primary position, and 1 had elite arm strength at their primary position. Now I'm defining weak as 25th percentile and below, again at their primary position, and elite as 75th percentile and above. We can see the 2 players here. One was a primary position of shortstop, even though he also played second base, which is what I'm using to determine him as weak. And I'd also like to make special note is we see the right fielder with elite arm strength wasn't promoted, and he had the best arm strength of any player at this level for the season. So the trend isn't exactly clear yet, but hopefully in the next few seasons it could be a little bit more clear. So if we look at the season 2 of data, we have 39 players, and I separated them based on which level they played. Now, players here are appearing multiple times if they played at different levels, and that's how I was able to determine if they were promoted or demoted during the season. And there was 3 of these such players, so I thought I would take a quicker look at them next. So I don't know about the rest of you, but player ID 2255 just isn't that interesting. And one of the best parts about baseball is the names, so I thought I'd give each of these guys a name. So at third base, we have Stubby Malarkey. At outfield, we have Moonlight Hunter, which is a pretty cool name, all things considered. And at catcher, we have Tyler Shoulders. I know, SMT, very, very clever. So let's see how our heroes Stubby, Moonlight, and Tyler did. So if we go from left to right, we can see that Tyler Shoulders had an elite arm strength at catcher, and he was promoted from the middle to high level. Stubby Malarkey had a below average throwing arm at third base and was demoted to the low level. And Moonlight Hunter was demoted from the high to middle level with his weak arm strength at right field. Now I'd like to focus on the 2 demoted players, and one of the things you might be able to notice from this graph is that both of them move positions. And then the other thing I'd like to note is that they both appeared to improve in their arm strength measure. And this isn't to say that they become dramatically better fielders after they were demoted. This is likely just due to the sampling we have of the data, and they were actually elite level players when they were demoted. So really we can summarize here that 1 elite level player was promoted during the season, and 2 elite level players were also demoted. So it doesn't look like players are necessarily being rewarded for their arm strength ability. And I'm going to look at after the season like I did for season 1. Now we can see here that all 3 of Stubby, Moonlight, and Tyler ended up leaving the organization following the season. Now in Tyler Shoulders' case, he's like the players at the high level before where we can't really say what happened to them. But players Stubby Malarkey and Moonlight Hunter, it's much more likely that these players were either released or traded, as they would have to skip levels in the minor leagues. So it looks like the organization got rid of these 2 in spite of their elite arm strengths. Now, if we want to just focus on players who are either promoted or unpromoted, we can see that more players with weak arm strength were promoted as compared to players with elite arm strength. And I'd also like to make a quick note that players here are only at the middle or low level besides Tyler Shoulders, and that's because, again, we don't really know what happened to high-level players as there isn't data above that level. We'll contrast with the number of weak players who were promoted. There was 1 player with elite arm strength who went unpromoted, and I believe that was he was an elite level arm strength player at second base. So that's a valuable defensive position. And let's round third base if we want to make this a awkwardly delivered baseball reference. So we have 41 players in the third season of data. Again, they're separated by high, middle, and low level. However, this graph is a little bit different than the ones previous. Now, the first thing I did is I'm only including players' data before they were promoted or demoted, since it doesn't really matter what happened to them after the season because I don't have data for another season. The other thing I did was that I included their throws from all seasons in the data because I'm believing that these players didn't regress between seasons at a very notable level. And then you all might be noticing that the scale is very different. And that's because there was no sub 65 mile per hour players when I made these adjustments. So we're seeing a much more zoomed in graph, but the box plots here are the same, and I want to make a note of that. So there were 7 promotions and 2 demotions. So let's take a quick look at those right now. So what's very notable is that there was 0 players of elite arm strength promoted, while 3 players of weak arm strength were promoted. And I think, again, what's really, really notable is that there was 10 players of elite arm strength who went unpromoted over these players who were promoted. Now, I'm putting more weight in this unpromoted value for this season because of the increased number of promotions and demotions. I'm believing that this data is covering a wider range of the season. So these players had more chances to get promoted likely, and I think that makes it just even more, it stands out even more that they weren't. I'd also like to make a quick note, as you might see at second and third base, there's a teal dot. That player is actually the same, and he was promoted from the middle to high level, and he recorded 3 throws at those 2 positions, which were both at the weak level. But if we look at his actual value before he was demoted, or before he was promoted, I should say, he's the pink dot below the median line for shortstops, and he has just about median for shortstops. So he was not actually a weak level player who was demoted because of his arm strength. Now that was a lot of graphs, a lot of numbers, so I'm just going to summarize it for y'all real quickly. We can see that 6 players with weak arm strength are promoted, while only 3 players with elite arm strength are promoted. 12 players of elite arm strength went unpromoted, as in comparison to these 6 with weak arm strength who did get promoted. And 2 players of elite arm strength left the organization, either being released or traded to a team who possibly do value their arm strength. So in conclusion, it can be said that this real-world organization isn't valuing the 5-tool skill of arm strength when deciding who to promote, as many players with elite arm strength aren't being promoted or even leaving the organization, while players with weak arm strength are being promoted. And you never know how much a skill like arm strength is going to impact the destiny of your team until it does. Thank you.
We got time for one question.
Thank you so much. This was really interesting. So my question is about the hitting aspect of this. So obviously the value of arm strength is what you look to touch on here. So these promotions that happen, is there a way that you could account for, let's say one organization is more offensively minded than a defensively minded organization, where they value batting average or on base percentage far more than the arm strength? Because like you highlighted here, the arm strength can show up in certain occasions, but you can't really predict when those occasions are going to happen, like a last minute throw on the bottom of the ninth. So if you had more time or more available data, would you try to look into whether players are promoted or demoted in terms of arm strength, but also related to their offensive output and statistics?
Yeah, for sure. Players are definitely being promoted or demoted for many different reasons. And I think if you looked at all the organizations in the MLB, you'd see teams have very different trends of what they're valuing or not. So this is just like one team's valuing of one skill. But I think if you extrapolate it further, you can get a more, you might be able to kind of start to figure out how teams are actually valuing players.
And if players were promoted or demoted or called up and then called back down multiple times in the season, would they come up as, just like a gray dot in the data set?
Yeah, most of the gray dots that's for unpromoted. The teal dot here, two of the teal dots, I should say, he was promoted, then demoted, and then demoted. Well, he was promoted, then demoted. So he does appear as a pink dot and a teal dot in this case. But this is more just for visualization rather than it's representation.
Thank you.
Thank you. don't want to look at Sid Bream ever again.